we have a big data problem. We need more attention to get the most value out of at least these AI assistants.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast. My name's Brad Hefta-Gaub, and this is my trusty co-host,
Scott Porad. How are you doing today, Brad?
I'm doing great, Scott. We have a guest with us today, Ben Wilcox, and he's got a pretty interesting origin story, and looking forward to chatting with him. Ben, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of tell us what kind of brought you here?
Well, thanks for having me on, Brad and Scott. So Ben Wilcox, I'm the CTO and CISO of ProArch. We're a data and AI company. We help organizations get the most out of their data and really bring it towards intelligence. Very big Microsoft partner. My origin story actually started as I was a teenager. I started on the entrepreneurial side of things, and I built a web hosting business when I was 15 years old.
Love it.
I scaled that until just after the dot-com bubble burst, and things were kind of very challenging in the telecom industry. Sold that off, and then I moved into software development for about 3 years and realized I'm not a good coder. That's not my forte. But I am really good at organization. I'm really good at system integrations, and I really liked data. And so I started working for a system integrator in the Microsoft realm. And I thought it was just going to be like, hey, this is going to be, a couple more years. I'll get bored, move on, do something new. Turned out that I love the system integration side. And I love building things. I like being on the forefront of stuff. And I love the fact of, like, if you're a Microsoft partner, you're kind of pushing your boundaries at all times and always learning something new, right? As Microsoft pivots. And so I got a lot of opportunity early on to work in early cloud stuff. Some of the terrible days of early SharePoint, which I'm glad to have put behind me now. I've actually also done, security practices. I built our managed security service offerings, brought that to scale. And today I kind of sit at the intersection of what we do from a platform perspective, how we enable our customers to meet the Microsoft investment that they're making, helping orgs understand how to get the most out of AI and doing it securely. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, look at that. It didn't even take us 5 minutes before AI got uttered.
It's true. We really only talk about two things on this podcast, Ben, AI and tech debt. That's pretty much our whole.
Right.
I have a question for you about system integrator. I have never been in a system integrator. I've never worked with a system integrator. That's not been my space in the tech world. I've been more of a startup application software, online application type of guy. So maybe for me, and really for our 39 listeners out there, like, what do system integrators do?
You have someone who has a product, right, like Microsoft, and there's a bunch of configuration, best practices, standardization, things you want to do, maybe data migrations, etc. So system integrators really kind of bring that all together. So in the context of the Microsoft stack, right, it could be any of the products around there. It could be helping organizations like, so say you're a SaaS company, right? Do you really want to run your own infrastructure in Azure? Like, you probably have the DevOps side of it, but what about the security pieces and maybe some areas out there, right? Probably not. You really want to you want to run your business. So system integrators can be a partner that can do MSP type of services, managed security types of services, or be that partner that can help you integrate and bring those pieces together.
And so what are now I got a lot of questions at this point. We won't go too far down this road, but what are the kinds of challenges that you face doing that? Like, I would imagine if I'm a company and I want to, say, take something that I'm currently operating and have Microsoft operated, it seems like, I guess maybe I'm just thinking out loud, adapting how I do stuff or adapting my processes to work the Microsoft way, or I don't even know. Maybe you could.
Oh, it could be, right? You could be moving platforms. How do you move from AWS to Azure? It could be, how do I upgrade and do it safely? And maybe I don't have that expertise in-house. The system integrator, arena has certainly evolved. I mean, when I started in this space, it was, hey, let's upgrade your servers, we'll upgrade your applications that run on top of it. We'll put this into a refresh cycle. Then things moved to cloud, made things a lot easier, right? We don't have to necessarily do as much hands-on configuration with things like productivity apps like Exchange and so forth. In some areas, Microsoft has taken that responsibility of what you do from an operations perspective and simplified it through their SaaS offerings and automation. The same side, what they've also done is, we have all of these platforms now, right? You buy Microsoft 365 and you have access to 100 different platforms. It turns out like most of it's not secure by default. So how do we go about enabling the best security from the get-go? It's hard to be an expert at everything, right? And having subject matter expertise and working with a system integrator, you can kind of pull those pieces as you need them, right?
Is your typical customer base going? I mean, you started by leading with let's say you're an application developer, like building your own SaaS platform. Is that a typical customer for you, or is it? I will admit, I naively assumed that system integrators were traditionally working with the businesses that were installing other people's software and then trying to basically get all that software to work for their specific business, not necessarily delivering software to somebody else. I sort of imagined it being you know, the the supply chain, hub or the law firm or the, people that were using software. Is that just a m misunderstanding on my part, or is that also a typical client?
That's also a typical client. So, I mean, for us, we're probably a little different than most system integrators. We're kind of a full stack system integrator, meaning like, hey, ProArch actually got started as a app building company. We built ERP software. So roots of ProArch are probably a little different than most system integrators. Most system integrators started kind of on the server hardware side of it and kind of scaled up from there into adjacent services. We went the path of application development, data platforms. Then ProArch purchased the company that I came from, which was the cloud transformation services and cybersecurity. And so, and now that's evolved into, hey, guess what? All of those practice areas are what are required for AI.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So it's kind of evolving. I think, where we've gone and where the new breed of, system integrators are going, right? You really have to bring a whole bunch of different capabilities. It can't just be one single area. You look at what it takes to build AI, you got infrastructure in there, you got platform services in there, you got, you're building code on there, right? If you're building like true AI agents on there, there's security, right? How do you handle the governance and all those other pieces? Those are all the things that a system integrator could bring and maybe, add to a business, right? The business may only have bespoke expertise in certain areas. So oftentimes, like in the mid-market, even in software development companies, bring us in for the security expertise, bring us in for, maybe a data expertise area where, you want to do something new, or maybe you want to know, hey, what else has everyone else been doing out here when it comes to AI? Like, what are some of the best practices you've seen? Because we're able to bring some of that scale and best practices down quickly. And ideally, we come with our own accelerators. And that's something that we do, which is that accelerator has the best built-in practices already there, right? It's something we're keeping up to date, right? So we want to get to the part of value much quicker than worrying about all this architecture and everything else. Like, that stuff has to get done, and it takes us a lot of time to do it up front. But once it's there, we want to get to the customer getting the value as much as possible. Let's solve that problem.
Interesting. So, okay, well, we got to AI quick today. That never happens.
What did you say? I think you said, at least I think the episode that just came out this week, you said something like, "Gosh, I posted on LinkedIn. I'm sure glad things aren't moving that fast, or else it would be hard to keep up."
Yeah, it's a good thing technology isn't moving fast right now. I can't keep up. Okay, you touched on something which I think is interesting, which I'd love to hear about. Within the enterprise, people want to use AI to know all about their whole organization, right? And all of a sudden that means like all your different data sources, your knowledge bases, your emails, your chats, your whatever, all have to suddenly become available
Yeah.
somehow. and
Mhm.
pulled together. And you brought up, and there's the information security piece, which is interesting. It seems like everybody, every SaaS service, or I don't even know if it's SaaS service, every application, every SaaS service is trying to make it so you can plug everything's getting plugged into everything else. Right? It's
Right.
just going to be a big giant web of everything talking to everything. What have you learned that we can that because right now it seems like a mess to me. So I don't even know. Maybe you got some knowledge here that like
Oh,
give us all a point in the right direction.
oh, I completely agree. Like we've as companies have created this data swamp. That's my best way to.
Data swamp.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not a
It's
data lake, a data swamp.
it's
Yeah.
there's like alligators crawling around this thing. Like it's maybe old dead things floating around. Like that stuff is what every environment is. And I don't care if you're turning on Copilot or using Claude or whatever it is, right? These all are coming into these unstructured data sources. Yeah, knowledge can be key, but guess what? Your old knowledge really isn't that useful anymore.
I literally just one of the companies I do fractional CTO work for, the we were in a meeting with the chief data officer and he said, I love this line. He goes, I've never seen a database that was well structured once real humans started using it. I was just like, there you go. That's how you get the data swamps.
If you remember, like the when we start putting stuff up in the cloud, right? Like, hey, it's unlimited, right? Like, just keep storing stuff, and like, it's great. Like, you'll we turn on logging, and hey, we'll use this data sometime. Well, guess what? Probably didn't. It's sitting there. You have sensitive data, you have old data, right? I think that what we haven't anticipated is maybe some of the things that surface when you least expect it, and things that get tied together, right? Sensitive information and non-sensitive information and a response. And you're like, how did this come up with this? Why is it talking about someone's payroll? Well, somehow it thinks that this is like, in some context that I fed in this other document, it talked about payroll, right? Someone had a note or a company name or something else. And it just pulled something it thought was good, right? It's just guessing. So I think we have a big data problem, and probably classification problem. Those are the two things that I think are going to need more attention to get the most value out of at least these AI assistants,
Yeah.
Copilot, Claude, or whatever else.
Yeah, it's interesting. Previously in the before times, we maybe didn't have the best controls around our data. However, we had security by inaccessibility,
Mhm.
right? Like maybe anybody who could get their hands into the data warehouse or into the production database or into something could get to a lot of data that they shouldn't have. But they had to be able to get in there and they had to know where to look. And now we're making it easier to get in there with all these different connectors, and you don't have to know where to look anymore.
Yeah.
You can just ask and it'll find it for you. And it'll find stale information, which is tricky. Have you seen anybody like getting close to any answers for this, or are we just way too early for any answers to how to solve this stuff?
Wait, and Scott, actually, wait, so it's interesting. Like you said, we had security through difficulty of access, but I actually think that what you just said is we had like data provenance by inaccessibility. It was like, yeah, there's
Yes.
probably bad data in there, but so few people know how to access it that we can then put the burden on them to you better only present stuff that you have validated.
Yes, that's right. Okay, recently somebody showed off they had plugged in, I don't know, let's just say Claude. I don't know what they plugged in. They plugged in something to our data warehouse and they asked the question, how much revenue did we do last month? And it said, $459 million, which is not true. We wish it was true, but it's not even close. Probably because it was saying last month was April and it was looking at all the Aprils in the history of the company and summing those up, right? Yes, you nailed it there, Brad, which is we put a burden of validation on the user.
Yeah.
And I go around all the time saying to people, you cannot believe anything that AI tells you.
Yeah. Well, so Ben, how do you solve this problem, or what? Maybe is that one of the very real high nails that we're seeing?
I don't think that there's a solid, like, solve it all answer here. But it does come into getting back to like governance and how you are storing data, how long you're going to keep it for. What is your policy of where you're going to keep it? This information, right? Are you going to let your employees keep? Like for me, I've been with the company for 20 years. You're going to let me keep 20 years of email in there,
Hmm.
right? Is that good stuff? And frankly, for me, like as I use these different systems, right? I have ability to get into stuff. Like I end up with a bunch of junky information half the time out of, for example, Copilot. It's not Copilot's fault. It's actually a data problem because you know, we have, for example, like I have access to a customer information set, ProArch information set. I'm referencing the ProArch one, but I get customer information back in mine. And I'm like, oh, this is useless. That segmentation and being able to really identify and label your information. So from a data loss prevention perspective, you can do labeling, right? And that's really about classification. And you can tell your AI tools, hey, you're not going to be able to use this, or it's going to be encrypted, right? This isn't something that we're going to allow. That's one way to kind of fix that. The other side of it's going, hey, if something does come up there, right, surfaces up into a sensitive label in the response, so that I know that this is sensitive, and if I see that in my response, I'm like, what is this going on here? This isn't the right context. So at least it's another flag for me in
Yeah.
there. Or the third is like, we got to just go clean up this stuff. We got to go purge some of this old information. Having a bunch of developers in our company, having lots of research and development. Right? People don't like to delete things; they like to keep things around, and they think that, hey, I'm going to get this in 1 month. I'm going to need this for another project, and it turns out you never need it ever again. Right? We all have those long history folders in OneDrive or wherever you're keeping your information that is the archive folder, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
So
so we just got to be able to tag that.
don't tell anybody they have to delete that stuff, man. Watch how quickly they'll slap your hand.
My personal laptop ran out of disk space this week, so I had to go through and start to delete stuff. And it's crazy, like all the old stuff I had in there. I had copies of disk drives from previous computers saved onto this, all ridiculous. Okay, but look, I want to get back to the main event here, which is, Ben, I think you have some experience from your career that might be relevant. I mean, I'm sure you have many that's relevant, but for a particular part, which is, as CTOs, I don't know if the right word is persuading or convincing or whatever, convincing our businesses to pay for this stuff, right? Because we see these problems, we see these information security problems, but we have business stakeholders in general who are going to say, so what kind of revenue is that going to drive, or what type of cost is that going to save us? And the answer to that question is, well, neither, right? It's actually going to cost you money, and it's not going to do anything for your revenue right away. It's going to be a bank shot where now your employees may be more efficient. In your experience doing all this system integration or otherwise, how do you think we get the buy-in, the investment to actually do this stuff before we have a crisis? And then, of course, whenever there's a crisis, a company wants to pay to fix it, but like pre-crisis.
So I think there's a couple of things. So one, right, if you are talking to the operational leadership, right, they may have
Hmm.
this idea of this use case of I want to use AI to do X, Y, Z, and I want this agent to be able to do these things. And then we start talking about, well, let's talk about what sort of data this is going to be feeding, right? That the agent's going to have access to.
Hmm.
We start looking at that data and say, hey, this data is not very good, right? You got
Hmm.
all these, whether it's validation errors or, it's not well structured, it's kind of messy, etc. And we can't really do too much, right? Your accuracy, when we start, using this tool, we're going to measure it and you're going to have 70% accuracy, right? Now we got to start tuning it and getting closer and closer to try to trim that down. But what if we cleaned your data set first and really
Hmm.
started looking at existing data warehouse, right? We bring in someplace new and, we kind of start fresh with this, exact set that's just needed for this specific problem. Turns out we can probably get about 85% accuracy once we clean that up. And right now we've automatically, instead of spending 2 months trying to, clean and, get the AI to better filter on that, we've got a much cleaner data set and we can get to actually solving your problem much better.
So are you saying, Ben, that one of the with the sort of change that we're experiencing right now with people thinking about AI, thinking about how to use AI to automate parts of their business, that essentially is a wedge or an opportunity for us to say, hey, this is going to go much better for you if you deal with this thing that you've been ignoring, the data swamp in your backyard. Like, is that part of the pitch here? Like,
It is. And start with just that use case, right? We're not talking about cleaning up all of your data. Let's just start with that one use case, right? Create a new pipeline, bring it in someplace else. Get the filters going on that side so that you start working on cleaner data sets that AI can do. And that's true, I think, with any of these tools, right? If we look at like Copilot, right? Who wants to spend their bunch of time, having a problem where they have bad data out of there, right? The AI adoption is going to go down. Right? These companies are putting money, and any of these tools are all expensive, right? They're all $20, $30 a user at least.
I want to float an idea to the two of you and see if this resonates. I think a lot of people are blaming hallucinations when there's some other thing that's causing the bad result. And I think one of those examples of a thing that causes bad results is bad data. And maybe the
Mm-hmm.
AI didn't hallucinate. It just literally pulled up some concrete data and it was in there. It was bad data. It wasn't hallucinated. It was just bad data to begin with. Had a human looked at it and believed it, they also would have hallucinated. When I see people, because my main use of AI these days is speeding up developers writing code.
Mm-hmm.
And the naysayers who are like, oh, I can't trust it because it hallucinates. It's like, no, it didn't hallucinate. It just borrowed a paradigm from your code base that was already a bad paradigm. Look, I can go look at your code right now and show you the exact same thing that you're complaining that it came up with. You
Mm-hmm.
you wrote that like 6 months ago, right? So there you go. I want to float that idea. Like people are blaming hallucination in cases where it's actually just pulling out real data that happens to be wrong or bad.
I'll buy that.
I think that there's a good percentage of that. I also think that there's a good percentage of your prompt was poor, and so your results are poor, right? So you're not getting the tightness, you're not getting the security, you're not getting whatever it is. Like your code's not extra long because you chose not to go and provide a very tight description, and so AI then had to guess, right? That's all it's doing is guessing what the next piece is. So
Yeah, and when we ask developers to write code and we don't give them the specification, guess what they do?
because
They
Yes.
guess, they fill it in. And I guess like to put my, because we're talking about data and the data swamp in your backyard, like that data analyst, that data engineer, right? Like they're having to either trust the data that they have or they're having to like not necessarily guess, but at least work around it and think about it. And whether that was a human or an AI agent, it still slows both of them down if they've got bad working data.
yeah,
Yeah.
Ben, you said something a minute ago which it slightly goes against at least my own personal conventional wisdom. But I think you might be onto something. You talked about taking that data, moving it into its own data source and cleaning it there or having it be clean there. So much of at least, I don't know if it's total conventional wisdom, but it's like been having a single source of truth for data, right? And now we're talking about maybe the way to get this to be most accurate is actually to have multiple copies of the same data, but so that we can have clean versions of it. Now that I say that out loud, it's a little bit like the sort of data mart model we used to follow, I suppose, where you had raw data and then you transformed it into something else. Maybe there's a pattern there we can learn from what we already did.
a lot of the work that we do is taking all of these bespoke systems, right? Let's talk about like Salesforce, right? There might be an Oracle ERP or some other things, right? And the business wants to get some sort of intelligence out of the value of combining these data sources. So maybe my approach is a little different because we're always thinking about how do we generate these insights for the business value side of it. And those are typically bespoke systems that have their own set of parameters. And those are generally much harder to change. They're more impactful to change. And so when we're trying to get to an answer of something, we typically go through what that data mart type of processing of, let's just extract the pieces that we need. Well, I guess we'll bring it in as a bronze layer, right? We'll clean it there, but as we move to silver and gold, we'll clean it up and get it to a point where gold's the one that we're ultimately leveraging on the AI side. So we're just trying to pick the cleanest, easiest route, and sometimes also the one that requires the least business resistance. Mm-hmm. It's not going to solve the problem that, hey, your Salesforce data still sucks and needs to be cleaned or whatever it is. But we're at least solving the other piece, which is, hey, let's start working on something that actually is good. Maybe we actually can put that data lineage in place and start seeing what we're cleaning up, right? So you can go back to your business stakeholders and say, hey, you know what? I know how we got to this revenue number. It came from this system, we cleaned it up because, of this parameter, and we can kind of see what changed in there. Businesses are complex. Like the revenue number that my CFO wants to see and looks at is different than what someone that's in operations is looking at on a day-to-day basis. At the end of the day, the board wants to see the CFO number, but the operations person needs to make decisions on it. So they have some other parameters that they're layering in.
Scott asked this question, and I think this is kind of one of the universal questions that, CTOs or CISOs or CIOs or CDO, chief data officers. It's like this mix of us that are dealing with our fingers in the technology. And obviously, by the time we get to the C-suite, we have to be good at communicating with our non-technical stakeholders. I think Scott's question earlier around the thing of like, so often the question comes down to like, how's it affect my top line or how's it affect my bottom line? And, obviously every time you have a new project that you're doing, you've got a wedge to try to like clean things up and clean up effectively, like this is like technical debt. This is like technical debt in a code base. This is technical debt in your data lake,
Mm-hmm.
And
data debt.
It's data debt. Yeah, exactly. And have you found a magic incantation to help convince the non-technical stakeholders that this is real and they have to deal with it?
It's partially about education. It's also about showing business value, right? Like if we can show value in a return that's generating some money for someone, right? Getting investments to do stuff is cheap. So that's why we always try to take, especially like early on, take the least path of resistance to try to get to a point where we can show that, hey, this is the process you guys should be doing, right? If we, for example, I'll take it back to one of our consultants works with companies to help them with their Copilot adoption, right? And looking at it from a perspective of, you have all this unstructured data, let's use it in more productive ways. If we start, as one of those exercises, we take a scope point and we like point it to a SharePoint library, and then we, build an agent on there that can, use just that subset of information for that business outcome. People are so much happier with that output in there, and they recognize, and then we go through that process of explaining, hey, this is, because it's really scoped narrow, right? We can, ground the responses in your data sets, make sure it's not going out to the web and adding other pieces and so forth. They can start understanding that. And I think, so it's kind of a little bit of a show and tell. It's also showing that, hey, you can get value out of this at the end, right? Here's an output. And we can actually measure some of those outputs, right? Hey, look, once we can teach people how to fish, essentially, right? Their productivity goes like this. Or, hey, let's, once we, get your agent grounded with much better data, instead of a 60% quality rate or whatever metrics you want to track, and what's important on your responses there, maybe we are at 85. Guess what? Your end customers are going to be a lot happier because they're expecting, that level of response or whatever it is. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So I think it's, if you can show the value and, make sure you know what's important to the audience that's consuming that, then you'll be able to get and secure that extra thing, right? Now, all of a sudden, we have all these things around SharePoint governance that have started coming up. Customers are asking for that because they realize that people are starting to see that, hey, if we clean up this data, and get rid of some of the stuff that we have, or label our sensitive information so that it doesn't show up in prompts. Or maybe we have contractual obligations that ensure that we can't show this stuff, or you can't use it in AI. And we're meeting those obligations. Contractual obligations are always a great wedge. That certainly opens the door. If you can't meet your customer obligations or your contractor obligations, then it's funny. Money opens up there.
Yeah, that is definitely true.
So, how much has changed in this space? Like,
at least in the data space, these aren't new challenges. They're just being highlighted like never before.
Yeah.
Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, because you're letting something else reason over it, right? Like, we were consuming this data before with filters. Analysts would go write your Power BI report or whatever it is, and they knew what to filter. Now we're just asking a question and expecting the filter to be in place, and that's not happening. So it's getting better. I mean, like, look at the tools. They ask questions now, but it's still not the same.
Brad sent me something recently that someone had put out there. I can't remember what it was called. It was like an AI manifesto or something like that.
Yeah.
It was sort of modeled on the Agile manifesto. I don't remember every detail of it, but if I recall, one of the first bullet points it had there was taste and judgment are valuable, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying when you talk about that person building the report in Power BI, they were using their taste and judgment to understand, oh, I should filter this data out of this report, or, oh, this table doesn't have good information in it, good data in it, so I shouldn't rely upon it, or whatever. It had knowledge. The person had knowledge and experience that the AI, I mean, it isn't really intelligent, right? So the AI doesn't really have that taste and judgment. I guess it's just making the garbage in, garbage out problem worse than ever.
100%.
And I guess as CTOs or as data leaders, as information security leaders, we're going to have to do something with our business leaders to bring this like to the surface in a different way than we ever have before. Maybe like some of the guardrails that helped us get away with not doing it are kind of melting away.
From what I see, like, our teams are completely collapsing. We are doing projects. I mean, I'll go back, 4 or 5 years ago, right? Security may or may not have been in the room. Someone from the infrastructure team in Azure or whoever would be maybe consulted for a little bit and brought in. The data engineer would be working on his kind of piece, and there'd be some collaboration. But what we're seeing now, and the developer, the full stack developer, would be building front end or whatever else with everything up or the middleware. But now what we end up with is all these people are working together and they're trying to solve one problem and do all of their jobs in one solution. And very much before it was, hey, we're rolling this out and security, go plus it. Now it's, security has to create their security guardrails. The data team has to create their data guardrails. The team that's writing the agents, right, they need to have their solid framework and being able to make sure that you have the right agent framework in place or customization so that the agent's responding the right ways and getting the business outcome. So we are really seeing a complete collapse of the teams and how they work, and really becoming a fusion team of sorts, which security teams are learning to develop. And developing teams are learning to secure. It's really kind of interesting time. I don't think I've seen this ever before.
No, the whole my whole career at least has been the specialization, right? Which is like, I've always done online stuff, but it started out you kind of did everything, and then we started developing all these different little specialties, the different parts. You just named some of them, the data engineer. I mean, did data engineer even exist, that phrase 10 years ago? Maybe 10 years ago it did, but like, it's all been a matter of specialization as the industry has matured. And now this is kind of like flipping everything up.
Yeah.
I wonder do you think we'll start to see a different kind of specialization just into different roles? Because it isn't practical. Like if you look at just like human society in general and like the evolution of our, like, say, political or our economies, right? It's all about specialization, right? From the subsistence farmer, right? All the way down to now you got a guy that's a data engineer, right? And so like it can't be the case that we all meld into everybody does everything. There has to be some sort of new specialization. That's the only way this stuff scales, right?
Yeah, I think you just have to have adjacent skills, right? So you have to have an understanding, for example, as a developer, of what the SDLC process is, or how to secure your stuff, and those. I think it's really coming up to the architects really have to collaborate a lot more and setting those frameworks in the beginning, and then once you kind of have that set of frameworks, hey, go at it, right? Now you are sticking within the guardrails of the system, and you can operate within that. And that's kind of your guiding side, and maybe that's where all the specialties are. But architects are starting to have adjacent skills and starting to learn about what's important to each other.
Thing that keeps coming to my mind as especially when you talk about, Ben, the idea of these guardrails and stuff like that. One of the things that I'm pretty convinced of is that like we always needed those guardrails. It's just that so many companies got, you know, got either didn't build the guardrails early, or they didn't build them until it was too late, and they needed them and it was too late. Or it's not so much that kind of the AI agents force us to have those guardrails. We should have had those guardrails for the humans, right? Like the thing that, just what, like a couple weeks ago, some startup had a AI agent that basically deleted their entire production database, right? And it's like, hold on a second, like that. Okay, sure, we can blame, maybe it was Cursor or Claude Code, and maybe we can blame Vercel or whatever backend it was, Supabase or Vercel or AWS or whatever. But the reality is that human that agent was working on behalf of, that human apparently had the credentials to delete all the production databases. Like
Totally.
what was that all about?
Yeah, like they weren't following the fundamentals, right? Role-based access controls. You shouldn't have had all that. So that could have happened in 100 different ways, right? You could have had a cron job go delete that database, but like, I guess the difference is like, we're getting into a point where agents are taking actions. All right, cron job might take an action, but we're asking it to actually go do things and make decisions, right? So essentially, like, hey, agent, go out and buy me a bunch of food. Like, I'd be curious, like, once that becomes a commonplace, of like how many people end up with Instacart, groceries that they didn't order. It would be a large.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Why do I have so many bananas? Well, you said you wanted a bunch of bananas.
Right.
Right, but the eager intern could have just as easily deleted the production database. And in fact, how many of them have?
Or the person that's rushed, right? I've had that before. I did, one of my big mistakes was I migrated the SharePoint data the wrong direction one day when I was overwrote the production system with like month-old information because I was in a rush, and that was
a bad day.
That was a bad week. But like those things can happen, right? Like you're just being rushed. You're not thinking about it. Those types of things happen on a regular basis. But now, the ramification is, hey, this AI agent's doing it on behalf, right? And they probably have less logic in there, right? They're not thinking logically. They're just guessing.
Maybe the higher order bit is that the hype around how fast everybody can move with AI is turning some leaders into saying, we need to be moving as fast as the other guy. And sure, the AI agent is the tool that lets you move fast, but maybe the root cause or the sort of the original sin is, are you moving faster than you can reason about?
I disagree a little bit.
Okay, fair enough.
I think that the agents choose, if given the permission, right? If it's not in the like, ask me before you take action type mode, they can choose to make this their judge. It comes back to what I was saying a minute ago. The agent's judgment and taste is not the same as the humans. And so they are making decisions where even the intern might be like, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. And yes, databases get deleted, data gets copied the wrong way, but there's something about the agents that they actually lack intelligence, they lack judgment and just intuitiveness that I think it's creating a slippery slope than what we had before.
They lack the business context, right? So it goes back to that piece of understanding what's important to the business, or maybe it's the what's important to me, right? If they don't have that context, and I think some of the tools have seen better context, but when we start getting into like enterprise data, that's a lacking there.
One of the first systems I worked on a way, way long time ago, when you logged into the production system, back in the days when you logged into a production system, we got this message and it popped up and it said, hi, this is your friendly system administrator. One, play nicely with others. Two, think before you type. Right. And so it was giving you this warning, right? And so you knew as a person, and I was, 23 at the time or whatever. And if I was about to type RM, I was thinking before I typed, right? But the agent isn't thinking, it's just doing. Because it saw somewhere on the internet the data that it was trained on said to type RM at this moment, right? Or probably to type RM at this moment. So it's slippery. It's slippery. Now, maybe we can train these agents to be skeptical, just like we train the interns to be skeptical.
The system prompt lets you create some, skeptical personalities if that's the direction that you're trying to go. But I still think that I still think that the point Ben's making, or at least the point I'm taking away from what you said, Ben, is like guardrails matter.
Yeah, they do.
Guardrails matter, and I just feel like I'm not happy with the idea. I feel dissatisfied with the idea that, and I can't count the number of times in my career where this has been the fallback, right? Well, at least we have a human and their taste and their judgment will prevent them from making the mistake. It's maybe a last line of defense, but it's not a very good last line of defense.
Oh, we need technical controls like that. That's not a defensible position, I don't think, right? Like that's minimal effort on there, right? Technical controls will prevent that.
Well, right. And we spent a generation building up technical controls. And now these agents have come along. We basically threw them all out and we're going to have to rebuild them again.
Oh, yeah, what is it like? I don't use Claude Code as much as I use some of the other tools, but Claude Code has a literally, it's like asks you, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And then they basically have an option called dangerously accept any tools. And it's like dash dash dangerously accept any tools or something like that. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, I cannot bring myself to run Claude Code that way. So I feel like Claude Code is a great example where they've got this like they basically are like teetering on the fence and falling hard off of either side. Either you have to give it permission for everything it does, or just like YOLO.
I am confident that most people YOLO on there. That's what I think.
I don't know what most people do. I actually have been accepting, I choose to do it every time. I don't know what you call it, choose to issue the command each time. But I do find myself getting annoyed. I'm like, it'd be better if I could just say do it. I thought that was the promise of this thing.
Well, it's doing some of those things too. On the productivity side, I've been using Claude a lot in PowerPoint, and I live a little bit more dangerously in PowerPoint. I am allow the dangerous execution deletion of information because I'm like, hey, you know what? OneDrive has a backup version of this, so that's my take on it. But other areas, like you got to go back and look at it and understand what it is. Like, we used to make conscious decisions around all these things and what was coming next. Now, default's probably okay, but maybe it's not in certain instances. Maybe it's going outside the parameters of what you really want it to do.
Yeah, there you go. Default's probably okay, but maybe it isn't. Maybe that's so. So we started with the data swamp, and we've ended with the defaults might be okay, but maybe it isn't. There you go. That seems like the sum of it.
I think the lesson I took from this, in addition to it's worth investing to clean up your data, is buyer beware. That's what the defaults are probably okay kind of means to me. Is like you can't just accept all this stuff at face value, whether it's the data you're getting out or the way the tools are working. You really got to know what's going on.
Yeah, maybe you're gonna have to invest in different areas, right? If you are going to accept those defaults, right, maybe you have to go back and have more rigorous accountability and code reviews. And that applies to just about anything, right? Anything with using AI, it doesn't have to be just code, but make sure your quality's there, right?
Output reviews. Yeah. Awesome. Well, it was a real pleasure chatting with you, Ben. Needless to say, like, this is a deep topic, and I think you got both my wheels and Scott's wheels spinning a bit on trying to think through this quagmire of the data swamp in the backyard.
Thanks for coming on today, Ben.
Well, just everyone remember, you're not alone in your data swamp.
You're not alone. You're not alone in your data swamp. There you go. All right.
I love it.
Well, what do we say, Scott?
Smash, rate, review.
There you go.
Tell all your friends. Blast it out of the car radio. Everybody wants to hear this podcast. The How Many CTOs podcast on your radio. Awesome. Well, it was great talking to you, Ben, and we'll see you next week, Scott. This episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was produced and edited by Saffron Hefta-Gaub. Our theme song was AI generated by Porad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.